When my husband passed away unexpectedly, I never imagined that the real fight for my son's future would come not from grief, but from the very people who were supposed to support us, my in-laws. What followed was a battle that shattered my world and tested every ounce of my strength. My name is Laura Stevens, and this is the story of how my life fell apart after my husband died, and how my in-laws tried to take my son from me. I'll never forget that night. It was a Thursday, just like any other. The sky was that pale gray that heralds an impending storm, the kind that doesn't quite promise rain, but feels like it might, any moment. I had just tucked Ethan into bed, kissed him on the forehead, and sat down to catch up on some emails. Mark, my husband, was supposed to come home early tonight, just like he said he would. He'd been working on a big project at the office, and he had promised that we'd spend the evening together. I remember thinking how nice it would be just the two of us after a long week of work. But as I checked the clock, it was already 10:45 p.m., and still no word from Mark. It was unusual for him to be late without sending a text or giving me a call. I figured he was just caught up at work, but my stomach had that familiar knot, the kind you get when something doesn't feel right. I pushed it aside, telling myself I was just being paranoid. Then the phone rang. At first, I didn't think much of it. Maybe it was Mark, calling to say he'd be home soon, or maybe one of his colleagues needing something. But the voice on the other end of the line was too calm, too methodical. "Is this Mrs. Stevens?" the officer asked. I froze. My pulse sped up, my body instinctively tensing. "Yes," I said, my voice wavering slightly, already knowing that something was wrong. "Ma'am, I'm afraid your husband has been in a car accident. He didn't survive the crash." The words hung in the air like an unsolvable puzzle. I couldn't quite grasp the full weight of them. It didn't make sense. Mark was fine just hours ago. How could he be gone? How could he have died in an accident when he was supposed to be home with me? The officer's voice continued to drone on, giving details I couldn't process. The words blurred together as my brain tried to catch up with reality. I felt dizzy, lightheaded. My legs buckled beneath me, and I sank to the floor. I barely heard the officer ask if I wanted someone to come over, if I needed assistance. I couldn't speak. I couldn't breathe. I could only stare at the phone in my hand like it was a foreign object then. Everything started spinning. I don't know how long I stayed there on the floor, numb, but eventually I managed to crawl my way to the bedroom. I looked at Ethan, still peacefully sleeping in his bed, unaware of the chaos about to consume our world. I curled up beside him, feeling like a hollow shell, disconnected from the world around me. I kept telling myself this was a nightmare, a horrible, twisted nightmare, but the cold reality of it settled in like a thick fog that wouldn't lift. I tried to sleep, tried to numb myself, but every time I closed my eyes, my mind would replay the officer's words. He didn't survive the crash. I couldn't make sense of it. Mark was always careful when he drove, careful when he worked. He was the kind of guy who would check the tires before a long drive, who'd double-check the brakes, and even stop for coffee breaks just to stay sharp. But now, he was gone. The next morning was a blur. I called his family, his co-workers. I told them, as best as I could, through a haze of disbelief and heartache. No one could process it. It came over in waves, Mark's parents, his siblings, some close friends, but I felt nothing. I couldn't feel anything. I couldn't cry. I was just ... numb. I remember staring at the empty space in the kitchen where Mark used to sit, drinking his coffee every morning before he went to work. That was the only thing I could focus on. The absence of him in places I had once expected to see him. His coffee cup left sitting on the counter, his jacket hanging from the chair. It was like the world hadn't caught up with the fact that he wasn't coming back. Beth and George, Mark's parents, arrived shortly after the news broke. They were devastated, of course. It hit them hard, especially Beth. She immediately began organizing things: the funeral, the arrangements. She was always like that, overbearing and in charge. But for some reason, I didn't find it comforting. I couldn't. I felt like I was floating in some other reality, one where none of this was real. One where Mark was still alive and I just imagined everything. The funeral was an endless stream of faces, of condolences, of polite smiles hiding the hurt. I wanted to scream, but I couldn't. Ethan had to see all of this too, and I had to be strong for him. He was too young to understand the magnitude of what had happened, but I saw the confusion in his eyes. Where was Daddy? Why was everyone so sad? He kept asking those questions, and I didn't have the strength to explain it to him. How could I? It wasn't until we were alone later that night, when I finally let myself break down. I had put up walls around my grief, not allowing myself to fully feel it, because I knew Ethan needed me to be his rock. But in the solitude of the dark bedroom, with the moonlight spilling in through the window, I collapsed. The weight of it all came crashing down. The loss, the emptiness, the guilt. I didn't say goodbye. I didn't tell him how much I loved him one last time. I never got the chance to, I wept for hours, until I had no tears left, and then came the silence. The days following the funeral were the hardest. I tried to function to take care of Ethan, but it felt like I was walking through life in a fog. I couldn't focus on anything but the aching void Mark had left behind. His absence was everywhere, in the little things: his shoes by the door, his toothbrush still in the holder, his coat on the rack. But as much as I ached, as much as I wanted to curl up in my grief and never face the world again, I had a son to raise. I had to keep going. Ethan needed me, and I couldn't let him feel the full weight of our loss. Not yet. I kept telling myself that I could do this, that I could keep it together, but something started to shift. Beth and George started to step in more. They came over almost daily, offering help, constantly checking in. At first, I was grateful for their support, but the more they came around, the more I started to notice something that bothered me. They didn't just want to be there for us, they wanted to take control every time they were around. They kept bringing up Ethan. It wasn't just about keeping him busy or comforting him. It was as if they were trying to take over. They would suggest things like, maybe he'd be better off staying with us this weekend. You've been through a lot. Or, have you thought about how you're going to handle his schooling? Little comments, at first, that felt harmless, but I began to see the pattern. Their concerns weren't just for Ethan, they were for their own convenience. And that's when the unease started to grow. I had no idea what I was about to face, what lengths they would go to in order to get what they wanted, and I didn't know that the real battle was just beginning. In the weeks following Mark's death, life seemed to grind to a halt. I tried to function as best as I could, focusing on getting through each day, caring for Ethan, and managing the little bits of life that hadn't completely fallen apart. But the weight of Mark's absence pressed on me relentlessly. There were days when I felt like I was walking through a fog, moving through my routine without fully engaging in it. Every corner of the house, every small detail felt like a reminder that Mark was gone. I had to deal with it, no matter how much I wanted to hide from it all. Beth and George, on the other hand, were anything but slow to move on. They threw themselves into the role of grandparents, with an intensity that was almost suffocating. At first, I welcomed their help. Who wouldn't? Raising a young child after losing your partner is a daunting task. The idea of someone else stepping in, even if only temporarily, felt like a relief. I was exhausted. There were days when I could barely hold myself together, and having them around to distract Ethan for a few hours. To take him to the park, or even just to the grocery store, felt like a small gift. They were, after all, Ethan's family too. But as the weeks passed, I started to feel the uncomfortable stirrings of something beneath the surface. They weren't just showing up to help, they were showing up to take over. It wasn't blatant at first, not in any way that would make me raise alarms. It was small things, almost imperceptible, that began to add up. Beth would come over in the mornings, even on weekends, and practically take control of the kitchen, making breakfast as though it were her house, not mine. She would suggest things like, "Why don't you take the day to rest, Laura? We'll watch Ethan for you." And so I would. Sometimes I'd lie down for an hour, too tired to protest, letting them have their way. But other times, I noticed, it felt more like a form of control than kindness. When George came over, it was usually to discuss what Ethan needed. At first it was helpful. He'd ask about doctor's appointments, school meetings, and upcoming events. But then, I noticed that he would start offering unsolicited advice on things I hadn't even asked for. "You know, I think Ethan needs a stronger routine. We should look into getting him a tutor for reading. He's falling behind, and you're already so busy. We can handle that for you." I'd listen politely, my heart aching at the realization that they were subtly pushing me out of the decision-making process. I kept telling myself I was just being paranoid. They were grieving too, and they had the right to be involved in their grandson's life. It wasn't like they were taking over on purpose. Maybe I was just overwhelmed and seeing things in a negative light. But when they started asking more pointed questions about where Ethan would be spending time, more specifically, suggesting that he stay at their house for entire weekends, or even longer, I felt a flicker of something uncomfortable in my chest. It was as if they weren't offering help anymore. They were suggesting a new routine, one where Ethan was living with them more than with me, One afternoon, after they'd dropped Ethan back at my house following yet another weekend stay at their place, Beth sat down across from me, her eyes scanning me with an intensity that made me feel like I was being examined. "Laura," she said, her voice so soft it was almost patronizing. "We've been talking, and George and I feel like Ethan would really benefit from spending more time with us. We know you've got a lot on your plate, and we're just so worried about you. Raising a child on your own after losing Mark, it's so much for one person. You don't want him to be burdened by your grief, do you?" I had to blink several times to process what she was saying. "I'm not grieving in front of Ethan," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "He's a strong little boy, and I'm doing everything I can to make sure he's okay." Beth's smile was thin. "Of course, we know you're doing your best. But you don't have to do this alone, Laura. We're family. We want to help. And it's only natural that we want to be as involved in Ethan's life as we can be." Her words were dipped in honey, but I felt a sting underneath them. I looked at her, my stomach twisting. It wasn't about helping anymore. It was about something else entirely. George's voice joined the conversation then, adding weight to Beth's soft pressure. "Maybe we should talk about a more formal arrangement, Laura, a better custody plan for Ethan. We can all work together to make sure he's got a stable home life." I stared at him, the realization hitting me like a slap across the face. Custody? The word felt foreign, yet it was hanging there in the air between us, as if it were an option on the table. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Beth's hand reached out across the table, gently touching mine, her grip firm despite the softness of her touch. "We're just worried, honey. You know how hard it must be for you to juggle everything? We can take some of that weight off your shoulders. We could even start by having Ethan stay with us more often. Maybe even full-time, if that's what you think is best for him." It felt like the floor had shifted beneath me, like I was standing on unstable ground. The world seemed to tilt. "I'm his mother," I said, my voice rising slightly, though I could feel a pit of fear deep in my stomach. "I'm his mother, Beth. I'm the one who's here for him every day. I'm the one raising him." She didn't pull her hand away. "Of course, dear, but you're still grieving. And what's best for Ethan is that he grows up in a stable, loving home. We have the resources, and we want to give him everything. He deserves it." Was clear now? This wasn't about helping me. This wasn't about supporting my role as a mother. They were subtly trying to edge me out of my own son's life. I could feel the pressure mounting. It was one thing to have them over every now and then to help me get through the hardest days, but this was different. This was about them taking control, positioning themselves as the better choice for Ethan's future. In the coming weeks, I tried to avoid them as much as I could, but they were relentless. Every time I saw them, it was more of the same. Suggestions, soft criticisms of my parenting, and gentle nudges toward their idea of what was best for Ethan. Their words were wrapped in concern, but their intentions were clear. They wanted to take over. They wanted Ethan to live with them, to be under their roof, to be their grandson, and not just mine. I could feel the walls closing in on me. This was no longer just about grief. This was about control, about a battle that I hadn't even realized. I was in my in-laws, were slowly but surely trying to take my son from me, and I had to do something before it was too late. The first time my in-laws came to me with the suggestion of a custody arrangement, it was as though the ground beneath me had cracked open. I never expected that. After the death of my husband, the real battle wouldn't be over my grief, or my ability to keep going. It would be over my own son. It didn't take long for me to realize that what had started as well-meaning help was quickly morphing into something darker, something that felt like an attack on my very right to be Ethan's mother. It all started one afternoon when Beth and George called me to come over to their house to talk. The conversation was supposed to be casual, they said. But the moment I stepped inside their living room, I could feel the tension hanging in the air. They sat me down, their faces serious but too controlled, as though they were bracing themselves for something difficult to say. Beth looked at me with those pale blue eyes of hers and said, "Laura, we've been thinking a lot about Ethan's future, and we believe it's time to have a conversation about a formal arrangement for his care. You've been through so much, and we know you're doing your best, but well, we're concerned." I blinked, confused. "What do you mean? I'm doing fine. I'm managing with Ethan." George leaned forward, his voice steady, but there was an underlying coldness to it. "You've been handling everything alone since Mark passed, and we know that's not easy. But Ethan needs stability, Laura. He's already gone through so much, losing his father. We think it might be a good idea to start formalizing his living situation, to make sure he's in the best possible environment, given everything you're dealing with. I felt my pulse quicken as the realization slowly started to set in. What do you mean by formalizing his living situation? My voice felt hoarse as I spoke the words. My heart thudded in my chest. George glanced at Beth, and she gave him a small nod, as if signaling him to continue. We just think it's better for Ethan to spend more time with us. More consistent time. We can give him the structure he needs. Right now, we want him to feel secure and to be surrounded by family. You're already around him all the time, I responded, my voice tight, struggling to keep calm. I don't understand. Why does he need to live with you more? I'm here. I'm taking care of him. Beth's voice softened, the sugary sweetness making it all the more dangerous. We're just looking out for him, Laura. We want to be there for him, and we have the resources to do so much more than you can on your own. We know you're grieving, and we just think that maybe it would be better for Ethan to spend more time with us. We can offer him a more stable environment. Her eyes lingered on mine, almost as if testing my reaction. My mind raced. This wasn't just about offering help anymore. This was about something deeper, something more sinister. They were trying to take Ethan. I could feel it deep in my gut. They weren't just worried about him, they were worried about me. They didn't trust me, and somehow they thought that taking Ethan from me was what was best for him. I shook my head slowly, the words coming out with an edge I hadn't meant to let slip. No, absolutely not. Ethan is staying with me. I'm his mother. I'm the one who's been here for him every single day, every moment since Mark died. I'm doing this on my own, and I'll keep doing it. George's face hardened, his voice taking on a more commanding tone. Laura, we're not saying you're not a good mother, but you can't be everything to him. We want what's best for Ethan, and right now that's more stability than you can provide. We've been through a lot too, and we're just trying to help. If that means we have to step in, then that's what we'll do. The words felt like a slap, and I could barely keep the tears at bay. I wanted to scream, to tell them that I was enough, that I was capable of raising my son alone. But the cold, calculated look in their eyes told me they wouldn't back down. They had made up their minds, and it wasn't about being kind or supportive anymore. It was about taking control. As they continued talking, my thoughts spiraled. They were offering me help, but what they really wanted was custody. They wanted a piece of Ethan's life, a piece of me, and they were willing to use their wealth, their power, and their guilt over losing their son to do whatever it took to get it. The conversation ended, but the weight of what had just happened stayed with me like a shadow. I went home that night in a daze, feeling both numb and furious. How could they? How could they try to take my son from me? This wasn't about helping. This was about control. This was about stripping me of my role as his mother, and I wasn't going to let that happen. I didn't know where to start. I had no idea how to fight back against something like this. I wasn't wealthy like they were, and I didn't have the resources to fight them in court. But I had to do something. Ethan was everything to me. I couldn't lose him. Over the next few weeks, the pressure from Beth and George grew. They became more frequent in their visits, and their words more insistent. Every time they came by, they tried to plant the seed of what they thought was best for Ethan. They would talk about things like how Ethan would benefit from being with them more, how they could take him to more extracurricular activities, how they could give him everything he needed. I started noticing little things that made my skin crawl. For example, they began dropping off paperwork for me to sign, things I hadn't requested. At first, I thought they were simply being helpful, but I quickly realized these were legal documents about guardianship, about joint custody, about their ability to make decisions for Ethan without me. It felt like they were orchestrating the whole thing behind my back. Every visit, every phone call, every subtle comment about making things easier for me felt more like a carefully planned move in a chess game. The more I resisted, the more aggressive they became, and I could see the anger building behind their smiles. They weren't used to being challenged, especially by me, the person they had always looked down on as not being good enough for their son. One afternoon, after I had refused yet again to sign over any legal rights, Beth sent me an email. It was brief, but its implications were chilling. Laura, we've tried to be patient and understanding. But if you continue to refuse to formalize Ethan's future, we will have no choice but to take legal action. This isn't just about you. This is about what's best for Ethan, and we believe you're not in a position to make that decision alone. I couldn't believe it. They were threatening me. They were trying to intimidate me into surrendering my son. That night, I called a lawyer. It was the only step I could take. The moment I walked into that office, I knew the real fight had begun. The phone call that came 2 weeks after Beth's email felt like the inevitable conclusion to a battle I had never wanted to fight. The moment I saw the name of their lawyer flashing on the screen, my stomach dropped. I had expected it, but the reality of it still sent waves of panic through me. This wasn't just a family disagreement anymore. This was about to get real. I sat on the edge of my bed, phone clutched tightly in my hand, trying to steady my breath before answering. Hello. My voice trembled slightly, betraying the dread I felt. Mrs. Stevens, this is David Marshall, attorney for Beth and George Wilkins, came the cold, professional voice on the other end. I'm calling to inform you that we have initiated legal proceedings for custody of your son, Ethan. You should have received the formal petition by now. We are confident that this will be settled quickly and amicably. But if you choose to contest this, we will not hesitate to take further action. I couldn't speak. The words hung in the air, unspoken for what felt like an eternity. When I finally found my voice, it came out more as a whisper than anything else. You can't do this. He's my son. You can't just take him from me. We're acting in the best interest of Ethan, David replied, as though reading from a script. He needs stability. And unfortunately, Mrs. Stevens, we believe that your grief has left you unable to provide him with that. The conversation ended abruptly with the mention of court dates, filings, and more legal jargon than I could process at once. But one thing stuck with me, the cold certainty in their tone. They didn't just think they were right, they knew they were. I wasn't going to back down. I couldn't, but deep inside I was terrified. In the following days, I went into a full-on panic mode. I had no idea what the legal system would entail. I was just a grieving widow, a mother trying to raise her son without her partner, without a support system. My in-laws, on the other hand, had resources, money, and a lawyer who had no qualms about pushing boundaries. I knew I had to fight for Ethan, for Mark. For me, that's when I met with Allison. She was a family law attorney, sharp as a tack and fiercely compassionate. When I walked into her office, I felt the weight of the world lift off my shoulders. Just a little. Finally, I had someone on my side. Someone who understood what I was facing. Allison listened to my story patiently, letting me vent my fears and frustrations. After hearing everything, she smiled, though it was tinged with the sadness of knowing how hard this would be for me. Here's what we're going to do, she said, her tone direct and professional. We'll file a response to their petition. We'll request full custody of Ethan and counter their claims with every piece of evidence we can get our hands on. Your strength as a mother, your ability to provide for him emotionally and financially, those will be the foundation of your case. She paused, looking at me intently. We're going to make sure the court knows that this isn't just about who has more money or resources. This is about who is there for Ethan every day. You're the one who's been there for him since the moment Mark passed. You're the one who has sacrificed, who has fought through grief to keep going. We will prove that. I nodded, feeling the first spark of hope in my chest. But I knew this wasn't going to be easy. The weeks ahead were filled with stress, constant meetings, document exchanges, and late nights poring over legal texts. Allison's team was thorough, and she made it clear that the fight for custody was going to be a marathon, not a sprint. But as exhausting as it was, I kept going because Ethan needed me. The hardest part wasn't the paperwork or the legal filings. It was dealing with the emotional toll. Every time I saw Beth and George, they were more aggressive, more determined to make me feel weak, to make me second-guess myself. Their strategy was clear: wear me down until I gave up. One afternoon, George came to my house unexpectedly. Ethan was playing in the living room, and I was just about to sit down for a quick lunch when he knocked on the door. I opened it to find him standing there, looking grim but trying to mask it with forced politeness. "Laura, I just wanted to have a word with you," he said, his voice low but firm. I let him in, though my instincts told me it wasn't a friendly visit. Ethan, oblivious to the tension, continued playing with his toys. George didn't waste time with pleasantries. "I think we both know this is getting out of hand. We don't want to drag this through court. We're trying to avoid a lengthy and costly battle. But you need to realize that what we're doing is in Ethan's best interest. You're not equipped to raise him alone, Laura. Not without Mark." I felt my blood boil, but I kept my voice steady. "You don't get to decide that. I'm his mother. I don't need your permission to raise my son. You can't just come into my life and take him from me because it suits you." George's eyes darkened. "You need to stop being so stubborn. You're not thinking clearly. The stress you're under, no one can handle that forever. Ethan deserves better than a mother who can't even get her life together. I could feel the anger building in me. It wasn't just about what he was saying, it was about how they were trying to break me. They wanted me to question my own ability as a mother. They wanted me to feel like I wasn't good enough for my son, but I wasn't going to let them win. I am his mother. I am the one who's been here for him every single day. Not you and your resources. This is my son, and I'm not giving him up to anyone, especially not to you. There was a long, tense silence between us. For a moment, I thought he might say something else, some new manipulation, but instead, he turned and left, slamming the door behind him. That conversation marked a turning point for me. I realized that this wasn't about Ethan's well-being. It was about power, and I wasn't going to let them take him from me without a fight. The court date finally arrived. I could barely sleep the night before, my mind racing with everything I had to say, everything I had to prove. Allison and I spent the morning going over my testimony, making sure I was ready to handle whatever they threw at me. I was ready. When the courtroom doors opened, I felt the gravity of it all. Beth and George sat across from me, their faces cold, composed, but I could see the flicker of something behind their eyes, desperation. Perhaps they knew this was their last shot. Allison spoke first, presenting our case methodically. She outlined the emotional ties I had with Ethan, how I had been the one to guide him through the pain of losing his father, how we had made it through together. We had family friends testify to my stability, and even Ethan's pediatrician was called in to support me. We painted a picture of a mother who was dedicated, who would do anything for her son. Beth and George's attorney tried to focus on my emotional state, trying to paint me as unstable, unfit to raise Ethan on my own. But the more they pushed, the clearer it became that they were grasping at straws. In the end, the judge ruled in my favor. Full custody. Ethan would stay with me. I could barely believe it. There was a strange numbness in me as I left the courtroom, but it was mixed with relief. I had fought for my son. I had won. That night, when Ethan climbed into bed beside me, I held him close, my heart full. He was safe, he was with me. And no one, not even his grandparents, could take him away from me. Moral of the story, the hardest thing I've ever done was fight for my son's right to stay with me. I learned that love and determination can move mountains, but the road to victory is never easy. Sometimes those closest to you may test you in ways you never expected. But you cannot let fear or doubt control your decisions. Stand firm in the face of adversity. Your strength is your power. Have you ever had to fight for your family? Share your story below. And don't forget to subscribe for more real-life stories that remind us to always stand up for what matters most.